Hello, I'm Dr. Ronniglin, and this presentation developed for the Engineering Technology Forum is on writing outcomes, and specifically writing good outcomes. So let's take a look at how we can do this. First, what are the outcomes of this presentation? Well, I want you to be able to, and if you notice I used the Bloom's taxonomy for these, I want you to go all the way from the level of being able to identify and state outcomes all the way to the ability to evaluate and create outcomes, covering all the different levels of the taxonomy in this one presentation. Quite an ambitious feat. So let's first look at why outcomes. What is an outcome? So a learning outcome gives us a statement of two things, one of which is a topic to be learned, and the other one is the level at which a student should learn this topic. And that level, the statement of the topic is really us as educators decide what it is that a student needs to know. So we can write what that topic is. That statement of level is a thing that we need to really concentrate on many times. And to do that, we use a thing, typically the most commonly used thing is the Bloom's taxonomy. Now you may see two versions of the Bloom's taxonomy because around 2000, 2001, there was a shift into what we thought those levels of knowledge were. So at the top before it was evaluation, but now the top is really creation. Regardless of which taxonomy you use, it really doesn't matter because we're the ones who make the decision whether creating or evaluating is the highest level of the taxonomy is unimportant to us as an educator when we're actually writing these outcomes, simply because we're the ones who decide whether it is creation or evaluation the level of knowledge that a student needs to know. So it goes all the way from the ability to remember and state all the way up through a level of understanding to the ability to create. All right, so let's look at things that we should avoid. The word understand or demonstrate understanding is the most commonly used practice, I think, in writing outcomes, and it's also probably the worst. And why is it bad? Well, because if you say a student needs to demonstrate understanding of something, you're not really saying how do they demonstrate understanding. Do they, being able to summarize something demonstrates understanding. Being able to create or analyze also demonstrates understanding. But they're two totally different things. So that ability to measure an outcome is what's really important here. And we can look at some examples here. So for example, this is an outcome taken from advanced manufacturing for a specific outcome where it says understand, operate, and maintain. Well, operate and maintain are things that I can look at and measure. But when I say a student needs to understand, well, again, don't know what that means. Do I mean understanding at one level or another level? So when writing that outcome, we need to look at more specific. So the two pieces of writing outcomes are relatively simple. You identify a topic, you apply a verb, and the verb tells you the level of knowledge that they need to have of that specific topic. Now, let's talk a little bit about granularity of topics, though, because a lot of times you can write outcomes that are way too broad, and a lot of times you can write outcomes that are not specific enough. So let's say, for example, previous example, what's really broad? Well, saying industrial systems, they should, be able to maintain industrial systems. Well, there's a lot of industrial systems out there, and the ability to maintain them all might be a bit ambitious. So you can get more and more granular in the writing of those outcomes to say, okay, well, maybe we really just are talking about industrial automation systems, or maybe even more material handling systems, or maybe even more just conveyor belt systems. That's the decision of the educator. So let's do an example here. An example really kind of gets you through how to write those outcomes. These are real outcomes taken off the frameworks that we typically do evaluate. And if you look at that, specify the responsibilities of the supervisor, implement human relation skills, understand the difference between management and leadership, apply differences between coaching and discipline, conceptualize organizational functions of management. I think right off the bat, you might see that there's some issues here, especially if you're trying to measure these. So first thing is, let's identify those red line issues. Understand the difference. Understand the difference. Okay, well, I can't measure understand the difference. I can't understand conceptualize. I know what it is. I know if I can do it, but I have a really hard time measuring when somebody else can do it. So those are things that should just jump right out at you. But there's more than just those things that can jump right out at you. We might be able to get a little bit better on some of the other ones, which are not necessarily as bad as the two that are in red. But again, there are ways to make this better. So let's look at specify the responsibility of the supervisor. That's not necessarily bad, but I think there might be better ways to say it. Implement human relations skill. Well, I'm not positive what we intend here, but it's not necessarily something that I can't measure. So let's go and see what we might be able to do with these. So the first one, specify, well, state or summarize might be there. That gives me an explicit level that I can look at. If I tell you that I need you to summarize the responsibilities, I give you, here's a list of responsibilities of a supervisor, summarize them. Or stating them back to me is one thing, because all humans, if they can turn around and state something back, probably do have at least some level of understanding. There is rote memorization, but I think that in most cases you can have a determination of whether that was just memorized or whether they have some level of understanding, but that level of understanding is important. Okay, when we look at that second one, implement human relationship skills, well, that is a level 3. How do you measure? It is measurable. You can say, let me give you a scenario and you apply the correct human relations skills to that specific scenario. So there is ability to measure. You can test for some of these things. And if you can test, you can measure. The next one, explain the difference between management and leadership. Or the next one, describe differences between coaching and discipline. Or even demonstrate. Okay, here's where I get to use that word demonstrate correctly between coaching and discipline. Demonstrate can be measured. I can put you in a scenario and you can show, okay, apply coaching, apply discipline. Put those two things together. Describe organizational functions and management. So those are better ways of saying the same thing. Now, once you can write good outcomes, it doesn't mean you're done. Because as educators, we build courses and we build curriculum to meet outcomes. So in the case of building framework outcomes, we also want that ability to build the courses. We also need to go one step further than that, because once you've built the courses and curriculum, you have to have faculty instructors that not only understand the topics, but understand the level of understanding that they need to impart onto the students in those specific topics and measure them. Okay, so that's that last piece. Develop the ways to measure those student learning outcomes. Okay, it is important. Lastly, the looking at what we just did. Did we meet our presentation outcomes? Like, I'm not going to measure these, by the way. I'm not going to, well, actually probably will. I mean, if you're looking at this, you probably will be building some of these things. So, hey, can you do it? Did I meet the presentation outcomes? Okay, what level of knowledge do you have now of outcomes? Can you get out there and create good outcomes? Well, hopefully this was useful to you, and that you now have a better understanding of outcomes and their use in building good outcomes. Thank you very much.